Is it? Oh, okay. Oh, there's another file. She's got. Yeah, she's got another.
I got it on my bag. You can put one there. Others comes in.
So we can start, Minister. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
My name is Tsidiso Matuna. I'm the Secretary for Planning in the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, DPME, which also, as you might be aware, hosts the National Planning Commission Secretariat, the National Planning Commission being an autonomous body. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to this launch of a report on poverty and inequality. I particularly would like to extend a warm welcome to the Minister in the Presidency for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, a still brand new minister of this department in the Presidency. Minister, thank you for being here. I know that it demonstrates the importance that you attach to this report, a report on the subject matter, which I also know has been your lifetime preoccupation for forever. In the years of the liberation struggle, centered clearly on poverty, inequality, oppression, under the then apartheid government. So your deployment in the Presidency for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, but for those who are not aware, but also as the chairperson of the National Planning Commission, which is an independent think tank appointed by the President. So we welcome you. Let me also welcome Dr. Paul Noumba Um, the Country Director of the World Bank in South Africa, who I know is here with a team of experts who worked on the report. I'd like to welcome my colleague, friend and brother, Risenga Maluleka, the new Statistician General. And as you know, Stats SA are a core partner in the collaboration between DPME and the World Bank. Let me welcome commissioners of National Planning Commission who are here. I see two of them straight in front of me, and I'm sure others will be joining. Welcome to you, commissioners. Welcome to DGs. I've seen a few DGs in the room. Welcome to other colleagues in government. Dr. Kifile Masiking, Deputy Secretary of Planning. Welcome to members of the media. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a singular honor to welcome each and every one of you to this launch of the Poverty and Inequality Assessment Report. I do so on behalf of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, as well as the World Bank, who are partner, and of course the SSA. A report that undertakes a comprehensive and deep analysis of poverty and inequality in South Africa, such as we're launching today. is a matter of great national importance. It is a matter of great public interest. There can be no challenges in our country at the top of our national agenda than the challenges of poverty and inequality. And as you know, the entire National Development Plan, our long-term vision, is directed at ultimately impacting on poverty and inequality. Everything that we do, as outlined in the NDP, must eventually impact poverty. So taking stock of our performance in the fight against poverty and inequality, updating the evidence and enhancing our understanding of these two twin challenges is something that I'm confident will be welcomed by all and sundry in government, in the research community, in business, in civil society, in the labor movement, and society more broadly. I have no doubt that the effort that has gone into this report will have infinite returns on investment to the benefit of society, but not least the poor in our country. I will do other acknowledgements, particularly of the researchers who have worked on this. Let me, at this stage, go through the program and invite to make brief remarks the Statistician General, and then we can carry on with the program. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague and Program Director, Sidiso Matuna, Secretary for the National Planning Commission. Minister in the Presidency for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. Let me also note Dr. Paul Noumba as well as Mr. Victor Sula from the World Bank, as well as commissioners and colleagues and distinguished guests, well, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very difficult space for a statistician, especially the one in official practice. Any statistician can talk about anything. They can dabble into policy as they like because they have the numbers. They're like a bone thrower, you know, when we go to the village or in Mhlawiya Lingana, where my Sangoma is. When you go there, they throw the bones and they tell you everything. But the statistician general is always limited not to dabble into policy. So no matter how much you see or you feel what the numbers are saying, you limit your space to that. Having said that, we have our surveys, and that is, we have a full census. Every 10 years we have surveys, the general household surveys, the income and expenditure survey, and other surveys that help us feed into the understanding of poverty in the country. One of the things that we have observed over time is that coming out of 2001, for example, we have seen poverty declining, and you could even look at it from a level of a municipality. For example, we could sit there in 2001 and say the poorest municipality in South Africa was Msinga in KwaZulu-Natal, and the 10 most poorest municipalities in South Africa are actually straddled between the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. And we have seen movements of poverty from Msinga, as we can use as an example, from around 60% to about 37.2 in 2011 and to 2016, Msinga sits at about 24.5. So we can see that movement, but the intensity, even when it has declined, the intensity with which those who are poor feel poverty still the same. So poverty has actually been reduced, but those who remain poor still feel poverty the same way. We see those things in the numbers. But we have also observed that generally in South Africa, and the NDP program director does talk to us about tracking the lower bound poverty line. We have seen poverty declining throughout the whole country. But as of 2015, we have seen a slight rise to sitting at about 40% now, with only 2 provinces, Mpumalanga and the Northern Cape, that seem to be going down on the decline. Obviously, that's a job of researchers to unpack what is actually happening in those 2 provinces. But one thing that we can assure the nation is that we will always measure, and independently so. Mulana, when they asked him, why are you looking for a coin under the lamp? Did you lose your coin there? He said, no, I didn't lose my coin there, here. But this is the only place where there is light, so I'll look for it here. So statistics will always illuminate where the issues are. And in doing so, will allow the policymakers, those that are leaders in politics as well as captains of industry, to engage with the citizenry to digest the issues at hand. We have looked as well at the South African multidimensional poverty, the SAMPI. And looking at the SAMPI, for example, while the international one, the MPI, only looks at health, education, and living standards, we have also gone to look at economic activity. And we have picked up that unemployment is a great contributor to poverty. So one thing that we have picked up is that when you look at multidimensional poverty, for example, because when you go to the households, they will not know what the amount or the context of what government is intervening in terms of water, sanitation, free water, free sanitation, refuse removal and electricity, and the feeding schemes at school. We have seen that our poverty line actually is almost the same like the international one. We're sitting at 7% at the global one, and we have seen that we have moved from 2001 from 18% to 2011 to 8%, and in 2011 to 2016, we have moved by 1 percentage point to actually 7, which is the same like the international one. So it's not our job to answer whether government programs are working, but when you actually look at the normal 40%, which is the lower bound poverty line, and you look at multidimensional poverty and the intervening programs by government, we only leave it to the public to judge, and we only leave it to those who are in charge of leadership and the citizenry to judge. But the numbers will always tell the truth. Program Director, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Statistician General. Without further ado, I'm going to now ask the World Bank Country Director, Dr. Noumba Um, to make remarks as well. Doctor.
Okay. Good afternoon. And thank you, Secretary for National Planning, for the warm welcome. Honorable Minister, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, and former Chairperson of African Union Commission, we are pleased to be next to you and honored to be here with you at this launch of the event. We do appreciate that a lot. It means a lot for us. You just took over a couple of weeks ago, and you find time to be here today. So thank you very much. I also would like to thank the Statistician General for the opening remarks, and also for stressing the fact that data are data, statistics are statistics, but they need to be good quality statistics. But policies needs to be formulated using these good statistics. So let me also appreciate and acknowledge the presence with us here this afternoon of my sister Nardos, who is the new UN National Coordinator for South Africa. She's just sitting next to me. She coordinates the entire UN system in South Africa here. So thank you for coming. I would like to acknowledge as well all the commissioners of National Planning Commission who are in the room. We have worked together during the preparation of this report, and I would appreciate to stress here again that we really appreciated your contribution and support. All the DGs and DDGs present, government officials, members of the media, as we say in West Africa, all protocols observed. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this launch. I am pleased to be part of this launch today of this report because I believe that this is an important piece is in not only acknowledging progress that has been made, but also in acknowledging the challenges ahead of us. As you know, this report that will be launched today here is part of a collaborative effort done in support of South Africa's goals to tackle the triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. These challenges were properly highlighted in the National Development Plan, Vision 2030. So the work we are doing here today is also something that means a lot for the World Bank Group because it's fully aligned with the World Bank Group twins goals of helping countries in their effort to overcome extreme poverty and increase the incomes of the people below the bottom 40% of the population by 2030. The report that has been prepared was jointly done with the input and contribution from the National Planning Commission Secretariat at the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, input and contribution from the Statistics South Africa, and many others that I would probably not name, but we would like just to express our appreciation for your support. This is also a continuation of a longer-term engagement that has bring together the World Bank teams and Statistics South Africa over data production and analysis. The report really stresses the longer-term perspective and how we should use data in order to be able to provide analysis and inform policy formulation in order to be able to tackle once for all poverty, inequality, and unemployment. In this report, we try to capture the drivers of these three challenges. We also try to understand the linkages between inequality and poverty. Global comparison provided in the report show also how South Africa compares with countries at the same level of development. So, Honorable Minister, there has been significant progress made in South Africa in terms of poverty reduction, in terms of improving access to basic services, education, health, and provision of social protection. All these progresses have been well documented, and we should further stress them. Progress has been made. However, this progress is being undermined by the country's recent low economic growth. That's the challenge we face. Growth that we have had over the past years hasn't been sufficiently pro-poor, has not created enough jobs to meet the targets outlined in NDP. As a consequence, unemployment remains high, and especially for the young people. This is the challenge that we face today for our generation to address. We agree when the President of the Republic states that it is an urgency to act now and it is an urgency to succeed. We have no choice. We need to find solutions to respond to the younger generation aspiration for better economic opportunities. This call upon us as development partners to work together in order to achieve the goals of poverty eradication and the goal of reducing inequality. As the World Bank Group, we would like to stress that we stand ready to continue working very closely with the government. We will bring to the table our global experience in this area, our technical support and knowledge, as well as, if need be, financial support that we can mobilize through the different partnerships that we can engage with. It is our hope that the findings of this report will enhance our understanding of the driver of poverty and inequality, as well as barriers to their reduction in South Africa. We have made good progress, and that progress has slowed down, and we should not let ourselves revert this progress. We also hope, Madam Minister, that the report will contribute to public debates and help in making new policies which are more effective to address the challenge that we face in South Africa and elsewhere. I would like to conclude by thanking the department here, DPME, for its leadership throughout this process. We really appreciate that. That leadership has not only created a platform, but we have used effectively to engage with different government entities in preparing the work that has been done jointly and which will be presented this afternoon. Let me also thank the technical working groups and committees set up by the department to guide this work. Without their guidance, we would not have been able to present it the way it is. And we believe we have been able to strike a good balance, recognizing achievement, but also pointing out challenges ahead. We would like to thank also Statistics South Africa and many others who contributed to the preparation of this report that we're going to be presenting now. I therefore look forward to strengthening our collaboration with all the stakeholders, with the department and with the government of South Africa in order to overcome this triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment in South Africa. So I would like to thank you for your attention and hope the report will be convincing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. So, according to the program, the minister was going to lead the report, in other words, speak before the report. She suggested that she'd like to rather be led by the report, so we'll make a small change to take the report so that when she comments on the basis of what you will have seen of the report. So we are going to make that small change, and I hope that the presenters of the report are ready to respond to that small change. I suppose at this point, really, this is where I should make the acknowledgements that I promised to acknowledge the World Bank and the research team that conducted this work, led by Victor Sula and Precious Zikali. I need to make the observation that the experience of working with the bank on this report was rather unique for me as someone who's worked with the bank and other agencies, UN agencies, because the bank allowed South Africans to lead the research. So the research was led by South African researchers, and on top of that, the bank made it very clear that it was important at all times to keep the departments, the key departments that are working on poverty, for example, social development, and a range of other departments as a reference group all the time, so that the knowledge that sits in those departments also features in this report. So I found that quite refreshing as an approach, and it enhances the credibility and legitimacy of this report. Status A, obviously, the poverty and inequality statistics team of Status A, who were also very central in the report. I've already acknowledged the DPME colleagues, the Secretariat of the NPC, and I do want to mention the following researchers, largely, as I said, from South African universities and institutions who worked with World Bank experts. Karel van Aert, Bernardine de Klerk, Harun Borat, Coretta Jonah, Marey Leibrand, Indira Bongisa Lekezwa, Julian May, Cecil Mlacheni, Mon Oosthuizen, Dan Pavelescu, Erika Raskan, Jamele Rigolini, Simon Scott, Johan van Tonder, and Rocco Zizamia. Those were the researchers who wrote different parts of the report. They are well acknowledged, and we expect our gratitude to them. And with that, I then hand over to the team to take us through an overview of the report. I see that 20 minutes has been set aside for this report. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank Honorable Minister Dlamini-Zuma, Statistician General, Mr. Molulete, Commissioner of Planning, Commissioners of Planning Commission, representative UN agencies, DGs, and everybody who are here, present here, for your participation. It's really a great pleasure for me. And before starting on the results of the report, I would like to mention that this study is done in the framework of the analysis the World Bank is doing in supporting the government, and another study that will be soon published will be Systematic Country Diagnosis, or SCD, and the main author of this study is here. His name is Marek Hanush, he's over there. And Marek is also an author of this study, so these analyses are aligned. While this analytical work that I will be presenting now in a minute is really analytical work. We do make policy recommendations, and we look at different areas related to labor and education, social protection. But we wanted to make this work really evidence-based and analytical, while SCD is going beyond distributional type of analysis and bringing more on policies in other areas. So we are really focusing really on social part. So this report, let me start from the outline and value added of this study. Now, you see the presentation, so I will be talking, I will not be reading, I will be talking as is. And the slides will be changing, but I will not stop on most of the slides. I will try to go relatively fast on this. So first, about value added of this report. This study, as we all know, the poverty analysis is not something that it's done just by this report. The many analytical pieces are carried out by many researchers, and a lot of information known. So what is new? Why we are embarking the World Bank with our colleagues, with UNDP and the statistics, with StatSafe. This is our joint project. So why we are embarking once again on something that we call poverty assessment report, which we call Overcoming Poverty in South Africa, and assessment on drivers, constraints, and opportunities. So if you look at the value added of this study, so it was, first of all, it takes a long-term perspective and test policy options. So we look really at the period starting 1994 up until now, and then further we project up to 2030 to see on the long-term trend of poverty, inequality, and based on our projection, what will happen with the levels of inequality. We use multiple sources of the data. We use IES, LCS, labor force survey. Those, of course, are coming from the stats say. We also use needs data, and we work with UNISA colleagues. They are here on their wealth surveys, which are very well capturing different dimensions of poverty and inequality. They all coming up together in this comprehensive report, which is something that we want to bring in one place. So we focus on the labor markets. It's not just analysis of the poverty and inequality. We also look on the deficiencies or maybe barriers of the labor market, really how to overcome this, because we see this is the main area to work on to overcome poverty in South Africa. We also look on multidimensional indicators, and as statistician general mentioned, it was work with Nozipho Shabalala and her team, as many other parts of this report, of course, on this SAMPI analysis that enriching our story about poverty. Then we look at different forms of inequalities and linkages between poverty and inequality. Now, if you go and look to the main messages of the report, I will maybe faster read them. And of course, they're very general, and they mask really the wealth of the analysis and the results that you will find if you read and my slides further. But just so you remember, we have 3 or 4 main big messages. Some of them new, and some of them already said in South Africa. But first, inequality is high, persistent, and has increased since dawn of democracy in 1994. The nature of drivers of poverty and inequality has changed over time. The roles of skills and labor factors have grown in importance in explaining poverty and inequality, while the role of gender and race, still important, has declined. High inequality slows down poverty reduction. High level of income polarization are manifested in very high level of chronic poverty, a few high-income earners, and a relatively small middle class. And the chronic poverty is very difficult to overcome. Current slow growth trajectory will not meet the goal to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. Accelerating poverty and inequality reduction will require a combination of policies that promote inclusive growth through boosting access to education and skilled job creation. Okay, I will not read anymore. I just wanted to read one part just to have a flavor of our main story. But of course, this is very general statements. But as you can see already, if we go through the presentation, so I will be talking for the next 10-15 minutes and 3 main challenges on poverty, on inequality, and also labor and policy. They are coming up together. Let's start from the poverty. So as you can see this slide, and this slide you might not see the numbers, but it's okay. But the idea, and these numbers are not new, also not new. They are coming from statistics South Africa, and also we of course analyze and reconfirm them and work on those numbers. Those are long-term trends in South Africa. And if you look at them, South Africa has 3 levels of poverty, and many of you of course know about this. You have food poverty, low-bound poverty, and upper-bound poverty line. And if you look at the upper-bound poverty line, 55% of the population in South Africa are defined poor, and based on the recent data 2015, 55%. You can say this is upper-bound poverty line, and then if you look at the lower-bound poverty line, this is in the middle, which is 647 rands per person per month, it is 40%. And if you look at the really low one, we find 25%. So even when we look on the extreme poverty, quarter of the population in the high or upper middle income countries are considered poor. This is very high statistics by any means. I worked in many countries, and this poverty assessment, not the first and not the second one that I'm doing, and having these levels of poverty, usually we talk of very different countries with very different level of economic development. So we have very high level of poverty. Now, those poverty, they're national poverty rates and poverty that you are targeting. And of course, this is the most important. But there are some other poverty statistics that we usually use to compare country with other, South Africa. They only use for these purposes, not for others, but they are also important and give us possibility to look at a really long period of time. And this, you have is $1 a day, 1.25, 1.9 is what the World Bank yardstick. So these poverty numbers, again, they're just used for this international comparison. They show this very positive story. They talk that from 1994 to up to now, which is 2015, the latest data we have, the poverty actually fell, and this is in a very consistent way. So it's a very positive trend that going from approximately up to 30% to something like 18%, 18.8. Still, it's very high level, 18.8. And if you look at another chart there, I don't know if you're able to see this chart there, but if you look at this later, you will see that if you compare the level of poverty of this 18.8 to the level of economic development of South Africa, you will realize it's very high. It's supposed to be 0. It's not supposed to be 3%, it's supposed to be a long time ago 0. 20%, it's really extreme poverty. Upper middle countries should not have it. So if we continue looking on the poverty statistics, and this is something new on this report already, and this is, we done this Morelli Brandt and his team in Cape Town, University of Cape Town, and we have an entire chapter talking about this as the issue of chronic poverty. And the chronic poverty, we talk about people who are long time found in the poverty, and we find that half of the South Africans during the period 2008-2015 were considered chronically poor or have an average consumption below the upper bound poverty line. It's a very high, half of the people are considered chronically poor based on this poverty line, right? And 78% of South Africans were in poverty at least once during this period. As you can see, the poverty in South Africa is really broad and affecting majority of the population. And the chronic poverty, what you have a big proportion of the chronically poor and some portion, like approximately 20-25% of the middle class and elite, right? And relatively small middle. So it's a highly polarized country. And this is the reason this level of inequality showing how difficult it is actually to eradicate or reduce poverty. Because you have two countries in one, really of this level of, looking at this level of polarization. We also look on other statistics, not only poverty related income poverty, we also look about non-income dimension of poverty, which we have different indicators measuring access to services, access to work and others, and they show very similar story of monetary statistics. They align very well. So I'm not going to stop and dwell on this a lot, but they are more or less talking about the same. One dimension I just want to bring, and this is a very long-term perspective. Of course, we know the poverty is very diverse and have very strong spatial dimension. And this chart shows just really the poorest provinces back in 2001 and 2016. And as you can see, and the richest blue are the richest, the red, just to show the flavor. And you see nothing much changed, right? Those were the Free State, Gauteng, Western Cape versus Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo. That remains after more than 20 years of development, but it's of course again masks lots of changes that happen if you go deeper in the analysis, but overall structure remains. Now, a couple of slides of nature of inequality in South Africa, and that I hope will be also interesting for you to hear, because South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. If you take all the countries that we have data about, this is what I don't want to claim the South Africa is the poorest country, because we might have some countries we just don't have data. But the countries where we have data, which is more than 150 countries in the world, we didn't find even one with a higher level of income inequality. It is a Gini of 63, which is the Gini of the consumption per capita. We have 63, which is this a measure of inequality, is the highest in our database. And if you look over a long period of time, it's only increased from 1993 up until now. This measure only increased. In the last decade is more or less stable with some trends on reduction. And they have different statistics, and usually income is used in an official publication. They even higher Gini Bureau of Statistics, Stats SA published of 68. It's just different measure. But by any measure, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. Now, we want to look on this chart that you probably see on your screen. Is inequality is high, persistent, has increased since the end of since 1994. So we clearly see this in the previous chart. But also now we want to see what happened over the last decade, since 2006, 2015. This is the core interest of our analysis. So we're looking on this longer term perspective. So consumption growth between 2006 and 2015 has not been pro-poor in South Africa. So the World Bank and many research, we are talking about this measure of pro-poor, how the growth is really, the country was growing, right? It was a very significant growth, and we have a lot of social protection expansion, we know, and we want to see the results of all this. And this results is presented in this chart, which really showing that it's showing each growth for each decile, from the poor to the richest growth of their consumption. And you really see the top people, top middle, grew much more on average 4% in a real term of consumption per capita, while the poor also grew. It's a positive, but much slower pace. The consumption of the very poor, defined by those bottom 10%, grew at lower pace than the rest of the population between 2006 and 2015. South Africa also lacks its peers on the inclusiveness of the consumption growth. So one of the indicators we measure, we have this shared prosperity and inclusiveness indicator, and it was before 2006 up to 2009, it was a period of the fast growth and expansion. It's when it was much better period for the development of this indicator, where it was close to the average. It was not above, but it was a little below the average of the other countries in our sample. But since the financial crisis period of this up until now, it's never recovered. And it's very low and one of the lowest in the world. That's very important to bring this international perspective. Now, we look at the wealth inequality. We look at the different dimensions of inequality. We just spoke now of the income or consumption inequality. But also, our colleagues help us. They're here from UNISA, and we have a background note on this, and we have an entire section discussing this wealth inequality. South Africa is also one of the highest in the world in terms of wealth inequality. And wealth we define, it's a total assets minus liabilities, right? It's really assets, really defined. And again, the Gini of 81, this is a Gini coefficient they found in this study. Different study, depending on database you find, there are different numbers. That's normal, but they're all in the same range of very, very high and of inequality of wealth. And when inequality of wealth is really a cause, because they are very related very strongly with inequality of consumption and income. This inequality of, and there's many assets and land and many things are there in the wealth, in the assets measurement. It's really one of the determinants of the income inequality. Another, if you go to the next slide, we also look at the wages, and not surprisingly, the wages inequality also growing, and wage inequality also high, and has been growing all the time. So you will see it systematically everywhere. It's no different story. All the indicators talking the same, but they are slightly different. Like, for example, labor inequality, not labor, this is a wage inequality. The persistence of high wage gap is associated with a skills premium and difference between unskilled, semi-skilled, and and high-skilled workers. And this has increased significantly over time. However, we also find something interesting. This is from the work of Harun Borat and his team. If you look at the longer period of time, you also will realize the workers to the middle of the wage distribution witnessed an erosion of growth of their wages over that time. So as you can see, this chart has this kind of missing middle. This is how he called this, and we use this in our report. But this is about talking about the wages. So the poor, they grew more, and the richer grew more for other reasons, because the poor are probably supported by the legislation, by the collective agreements, many other things. The rich, of course, they're growing because of the skills. The skills premium were growing significantly, but those in the middle, and they really deteriorated. And this is one of the main areas that we are looking on in our labor section. If you look, maybe the last dimension that I wanted to bring here of the inequality is inequality of opportunity. What we were discussing was an inequality of the outcome. It's about what we are showing. But when we talk about children or people, what opportunities they have when they're born, they're supposed to be probably in an equitable society to get the same, you would expect this inequality should be slow or low. And this is very high in South Africa, not surprisingly. And I just present here the same methodology used systematically, one of the highest in the world. And also, if we look at the changes over time in inequality, because we not just in the report want to document different types, we want to say why and what drive things and how they're related. So just to bring a flavor of the main story. So education is becoming the more prominent factor contributing to the inequality. So so race and demographic and other factors, of course, are very important, but importance of those race is going down. So for the 10 years fell from 48% to 40% in this decomposition that we made, and the role of education. And when we talk education here, it of course embeds skills and labor participation. So we are talking about labor and skills, and this of course education, they're all related, these issues. They are becoming a defining factor of this inequality. This exclusion you will be seeing in another report on SCD really manifested well in the labor market. So labor market is something where we should look carefully. And another interesting statistics, and we have a background note we are bringing here, we look at the issue of intergenerational mobility. So it's something that we discuss a lot, and it's a relatively new topic, but the idea is how much children can be different from their parents. And you have, when correlates are very high, it's a low mobility. When children easily can go further and get education and so on, then it have low mobility. So South Africa, and this is long-term analysis that we carried out, and we found that South Africa is relatively low on mobility. It's not surprising, meaning it's very difficult to overcome of unemployment. It's very difficult to overcome this high level of inequality because of the low intergenerational mobility. If we look at the drivers of the poverty inequality, so we want to, one of the questions we ask, okay, we understand, so over the last 10 years, poverty reduced, over the last couple of years it's increased, right? But we want to look at the longer period of time and answer what really worked and what really was the reason for those. Because we could assume that probably a lot of social protection, maybe some other factors. But if you look at them, this slide shows that the largest contribution to poverty reduction were labor incomes, okay? So, and we are talking about here on the low bound poverty line. That's now, so we take a look and we decompose different sources of income that had an impact. And you have first, work income had 58% explained the change. And social protection altogether also was very important. They explained 26%. Okay, they have other sources of income that play an important role. But saying this, it was important to emphasize so that on overall poverty, still labor is the main source of people getting out of the poverty, not necessarily just social protection. However, the role of the social protection was important, especially of reducing poverty gaps, meaning not only necessarily always eliminating poverty, but moving people closer to the poverty line. It was half of this. There's another statistic I'm not bringing in the chart. But also, if you look at the extreme poverty, there the impact of the social protection even more. So both social protection and labor played a very important role looking at the big story. But of course, we are looking much deeper than just looking at the main drivers. We look at the different components and how much their returns versus endowments impacted the poverty, or how much they were drivers. So we found the improvement in skills and education were instrumental for poverty reduction in South Africa. So those labor were coming a lot because of endowments. So more educated people, more skilled people came to the labor force, and this was the main driver of this change. Sorry. However, it's important to emphasize that the returns on skills are not necessarily growing anymore. So yes, we have more educated people, and this was the reason, but not the return on, especially on semi-skilled. And it very well corresponded to what you saw before when I was showing this missing middle. So it's really, we come into the deficiencies or problem of the labor market, when you really see that the skills are growing, only top skills are really catching this. But in the middle, yes, they're growing more and they're doing, but their returns on these skills are actually going down. And this I'm talking about this 10 years period. Then other factors, of course, play a role. The urbanization, demographic changes. We have these demographic changes that plausible, where families' size is, household size is falling. They were all very important. But very important to mention about social protection. And it just brought one slide, and we have a paper that we base in this analysis. It's not really new, because these results we are getting are confirmed in many other studies, but we also documenting this based on the new data, that the role of the social protection, all the grants and all this. So generally speaking, social protection is important in supporting poverty and inequality reduction, particularly among the extremely poor. So the system designed, not only it's very extensive, it's really big social protection in terms of GDP comparable, and also it's working pretty well. So without social protection, without this grant situation, would not be more or less stagnation in inequality. Inequality would go significantly up. And this chart shows that if you take it out, it would be higher by 10 percentage points, which is very, very high. I'm almost there. So it's a very significant impact, but it was working just to sustain, all right, this situation. Then we are coming to the last two slides, and I was just again, it's really looking at the policy side and the labor. So this, we have an entire section trying to look what really those labor's issue and how to, we are presenting them. And some of them are very well known. The second time we just reported, we have, of course, the issue of high unemployment, strong evidence structural mismatch between labor demand and supply, and we documented very well the impact on the poverty. Then location is matters, of course, where regional disparity. Labor market, role of the labor markets institutions is very strongly showing this. Role of this, diminishing role of the small and medium-sized enterprises, all this working, of course, in the direction. And those are not new, I'm not stopping, but they're really well documented in our study as well. But the last point I want to say, the work is important for poverty reduction, is definitely. But having an employed household head does not necessarily translate to lower vulnerability to poverty. Type of employment of the head is important. It's really interesting to see that the employment of some low-skilled job is such a low they're not bringing enough really to overcome the issue of poverty. Not always. So it's really about skilled and creating more skilled jobs. And this is the last chart, and we really, last chapter, we're looking forward. And we are talking about whether what will be by 2030 in terms of poverty, inequality, and we're using CGE model and micro-simulation here. But overall story is the following. We don't find that if business as usual continues, poverty will not be eradicated in South Africa. Not only not be eradicated, it will not go down significantly. So if you look, for example, of the food poverty line that is around 25% now, 20, right? By 2030, our modeling, it's only will show 18.8%. So it's very small, it's not zero. Okay, so how to reduce poverty, that's a very important question. And we have different simulation, and it continues with the next report when we go deeper. So to reduce poverty, you really need a combination of policies. And it's not just one policy, it's a combination of many policies. And some of them, to mention them, many of them related to the skills and labor market of these mismatches. They are not new again, but it's very strongly supported. This creating quality of jobs, especially for the poor, working on creating the skills, continuing investment of education, and making the education equitable, and also giving the poor possibility to advance on this. So this is more or less our report, and it's of course just the highlights and flavors of the analysis. I'm sorry if I took a little longer than I expected, but thank you very much for your time, and we will be more than happy to address your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Thank you for taking us through the remarks, observations based on what she's heard up to so far. Minister, I have the pleasure to hand over to you. I don't think you need any introductions, as it were. so I think most South Africans know your CV, Minister. So it's my pleasure to give you the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Well, first let me greet the director, the program director, but also the secretary. I like to call him the DG, but he's called the secretary, who's dealing with the National Planning Commission. And also greet our collaborators in the World Bank, Dr. Paul Noumba and of course the presenter Victor, and also greet our brand new statistician general, and our commissioners, and our brand new UNDP resident coordinator, and also the researchers, the government officials who are here, all the esteemed guests who were invited, and the ladies and gentlemen of the media. And of course, let me express our gratitude both to the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, but also to the National Planning Commission, with the commissioners present, and World Bank, and of course Stats SA for this work that they've done for us. Obviously, we all know that South Africa is really facing the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And I hope that the study will permeate into government looking at its national targets and how to eliminate poverty, but also will strengthen our planning, our national planning around these issues of poverty and inequality. So we thank you very much. And of course, as government, we have, and we should have, a huge interest in finding effective and sustainable solutions that will bring poverty, inequality, unemployment down in our country. So we value very much the collaboration, because we hope it will not end here. We hope that the study has revealed what we knew, but probably with more emphasis on where problems are and how to deal with them. But I hope that we will collaborate even as we try to find solutions. And it's in a way disappointing, but it's a fact that even though poverty has decreased, but it remains extremely high. I think for all of us, that's very disappointing, but it must then drive us to finding policies and implementation that will bring this down. But even more so, the issue of inequality, it seems to just be on an upward trajectory. And so it's very worrying. And it's not only extreme poverty we must be concerned about. We have to be concerned by poverty, as Victor says, that we must be at zero, but we are not. And we are not classified as a poor country, but we have poor people. And that's a contradiction that we must really deal with. We are a relatively rich country, but with a lot of poor people. And of course, it's also interesting that there are issues around race, but it's good that that's decreasing, but it's still a factor. Where you live, if you are in the rural areas, it looks like you are more likely to remain poor than if you are in the urban areas. And of course, employment plays a critical role. Education, but not education per se, skills. Because the economy now demands high skills. And if we don't have those skills, we're not going to make a difference. And of course, the distribution countrywide of poverty is still relatively the same. I think it's very important what you have said about the social transfers from government. Not just the grants, but as the statistician general said, the free health care for primary health care, the amount of electricity for the indigent, water, education, all those things are important, because if they were not there, clearly things would be even worse. So even though sometimes we seem doubtful about whether this huge bill of social transfers is worth it, but I think this study shows that it is. But of course, our aim should be to keep reducing that level of people who get grants and increasing people, more and more people who get employed, people who acquire assets. So this study confirms what we know, but I think it's giving us even more information. And for us as government, I think there are things that we have said we'll do, which link up with what is in the study. For instance, we know that even if the economy were to grow even higher, which we hope it will do, but the people who are poor and unemployed are not likely to benefit from that, because a lot of our people who are poor are also unemployable because of the demands of the economy that are different from what they have. Most of them don't have skills that the economy demands. So that should tell us that we actually need a skills revolution in this country in order to be able to begin to make a dent in the poverty, but also to begin to slowly narrow the gap, the inequality gap. It also tells us that we have to, in addition to social grants and the EPW, but we need to pay a lot of attention to small and medium enterprises. So, because those are the areas where we can create a lot of jobs. Big corporates tend to use more technology, and not create a lot of jobs. So we need to also pay a lot of attention to that. I just came, that's why we started slightly late. I came from the event that the President had earlier, where he was launching the Youth Employment Service, which is basically an internship for a year in a company, and hoping that after that year you would have acquired some skill and you would have a better chance either of getting a job or starting something small or getting employment in that company. And it's aiming at least 330,000 of those internships for the next 3 years. We hope it can be even more. But also at that very event, we were told that more than 5 million young people are unemployed. So which means this is one of the things that's trying to address that, but we need much more to do if we are to deal with just the youth unemployment alone. Of course, our government has also talked about radical socio-economic transformation, because we know that in South Africa, a lot of the poor people, especially black people, are not participating in the mainstream economy. And we need to transform that so that they can participate. Because if they don't, the inequality will just keep growing. And of course, we have also agreed that we need to industrialize, both in the manufacturing, but also in the fourth industrial revolution. But without the skills, we cannot also increase that part. But I think that what the study, maybe in the main body of the study, I think it's there, did not really emphasize the women and young people, I think, were emphasized. Because in South Africa, we have lots of female-headed households. And really the face of poverty in South Africa is still feminine. And of course, children, because if your mother is poor, they are most likely to be poor also. So I think we need to also pay a lot of emphasis on that, because women being the majority as well, and heading lots of households, it means the skills that we're talking about, the jobs that you are talking about, especially in the rural areas, we need to look at what is it that can be done in the rural areas. The issue of land and the use of land, not only for subsistence, but also to be an income generator is important. But also it tells us that no sector, whether it's government or business, or can work alone. We all have to work together, all the stakeholders, public, private, civil society, communities. We have to all work together in order to reclaim the dignity from this dehumanizing scourge of poverty and inequality that we are facing in our country. And maybe to just conclude my few remarks, because we still have to listen to the panel, I'll just say as government, we will make sure that government is aware as the department of this study, not only at the national level, but at all the spheres of government, and then look at what is it that we are not doing enough to begin to pull ourselves. It's not a good space to be the country with the highest inequality, almost in wage, in expenditure, and everything. So we need to get ourselves out of that space, but it's not going to be easy because the gap that we're trying to narrow, and of course we should not shy away from acknowledging that the apartheid system was a system that was there to systematically exclude black people, in particular Africans, from the economy, from the skills, from everything. So overcoming that has to be a big part of what we do. But in conclusion, I just want to end with the quote from Amartya Sen, who said, I quote, "Poverty is not just a lack of money. Rather, it is not having the capability to realize one's full potential as a human being." And of course, all the things that we've been talking about, that are factors that are driving poverty and inequality. Also stop us from reaching our full potential individually and collectively. So we hope that indeed these valuable research outcomes and assessments are going to assist us quite a lot and are going to be part of our national development, which are part of our national development plan in terms of what we need to do. But you are also shocking us into saying if it's business as usual, we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve by 2030. So it means we have to put a reset button. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for those remarks, those observations. Now I want to move right straight into the panel for each of the members of the panel to give a few just brief remarks, and then we'll have a discussion, a Q&A discussion, so we make the session also interactive. On the panel, as your agenda in front of you will show, is Dr. Kifile Masiteng, who is with the Secretariat of the National Planning Commission. I've introduced her already. Dr. Gilad Isaac from West University, thank you for agreeing to be part of this event. And of course, Ms. Nosipo Shabalala. I'm looking for, oh, there she is, yeah, okay. So let me start off with Dr. Masiteng, please. Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Kifile. I did indicate at a certain stage that the minister may take leave of us. So for those members of the media who have questions, they will have to be answered by Dr. And myself and the panel on behalf of the minister. So, Minister, at any point when you would like to take leave, please feel free. And again, we'd like to thank you for coming and gracing this event.
Sorry, I will still be in the building. It's just that I have another engagement with the Minister of Social Development. So if you have something that is really, really pressing, I will be in the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. The comment I just wanted to make is that this work culminated from 2016 when we came together and decided Statistics South Africa as the fact finder of the country provides to us the numbers about poverty, but there are these so what questions that remain. We will understand the dynamics only if we add one level above the statistics that we get from Statistics South Africa and do in-depth analysis. And this work culminated from research reports that made us understand over and above the descriptive understanding of the levels of poverty, what drives poverty in South Africa. The development agenda of South Africa that is struggling to deal with the three issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment today were looked under or through the lens of the labor market. We tried very hard to understand better what drives the levels of poverty that we see amongst the female-headed households. What drives poverty amongst the 3.2 million young people between the ages of 15 to 35 that remain unemployed, and already we see that they remain marginalized and might not even make it into the labor force. What drives us to see that the inequality continues to set the people or the society of South Africa apart? That it divides the people of South Africa between the haves and the have-nots. Sitting at a Gini coefficient of 0.7 in 2011 and moving now and saying it's 0.68, is that enough progress? Maybe not, but the understanding should be, having understood that level of inequality, one of the most important findings from this study is that for the first time we are saying the levels of inequality are affecting the progress that is made in terms of dealing with poverty. We are also starting to understand beyond the Gini coefficient as the absolute measure of money in terms of the gap between the poor and the non-poor. What are the other drivers of inequality in South Africa? The intergenerational mobility is an emerging issue that we need to understand better to continue to inform the policies of South Africa. The wealth and the wage inequalities that are emerging from the studies from UNISA and other researchers are starting to say, as we are sitting and understanding the 0.68 as the Gini coefficient, there are many other aspects that are stopping us from being able to deal with the inequality. And I think lastly, the best part that we might have to understand is how do we start to understand the drivers and saying if we are not educated, it means we are not building the human capital for the country. And if the human capital for the country has not been built to the extent that is required, the labor force will fail to have the skilled labor that we need to be able to deal with. And when we look through the labor force, we are also starting to see the differentials within the labor force between what we see in the formal and informal sector. And that dual labor theory is another struggle that the country is dealing with. So this report assists us to understand that there are many lenses that we can look into the issues of poverty and inequality. Unpalatable as the results are, I am sure, Minister, they are the best stories that development of South Africa can write for itself to be able to deal with the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. That's all I needed to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masiteng. Dr. Isaacs.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much. It's an honor to be speaking with the various eminent individuals here and speaking about inequality and coming from academia. It's also a pleasure not to be on a panel full of old white men, which is the inequality which we see very visibly within our own faculties. It's incredibly useful to have all of this information in one place in this rigorous way which the World Bank and others have undertaken. In my 7 or so minutes, I want to make 3 points with one example after that. And the 3 issues I want to raise are more about to say, what does a research and policy agenda look like which we can build on the foundations of a report like this? I'm not going to go over various aspects of the report in detail. And this is a reflection which is complementary, I think, and advances us forward. So the first is that whilst I think it's absolutely necessary to divide the data as has been done to look at the labour market, the social wage, social protection, and so on as separate entities, as we've seen. What I think we need to think about moving forward is how these various spheres interact with each other in a policy sense. And this is obviously acknowledged. For instance, the role in which education plays in employment is an interaction between the social wage and a labour market outcome. But there's all sorts of very important ways in which these various elements interact. For example, we might be entering an era where mechanization, technology means not everyone's going to have an 8-hour, 5-day-a-week employment. So what does that mean for social grants, basic income, and so on? So the first point is to look at these various spheres in an integrated way in policy thinking moving forward. The second, again, to look at what builds on this, is to think about adding a layer of what I would call a political economy analysis. So in the employment section, the focus is rightly, when dealing with data, on things like skills, the labour market, spatial elements. But we need to ask another layer over that, which is, what does the industrial structure of South Africa look like? Which industries dominate? How does that impact employment? What about concentration, monopolization within the economy? What about something like financialization, the extensive and intensive penetration of finance into our economy? On page 101, the report notes that in a number of sectors, the increased employment does not have a strong impact in poverty. And one of those sectors is financial services, which is a sector that's grown enormously. So what do these political economy features mean for these various outcomes? And linked to that, another part of political economy is to understand the various interests. Why is it that the structure of the economy looks like it looks now, which has both similar and different features to in the past? My third point is about policy, and this might be a bit challenging. And to speak, the points made in the presentation about evidence-based policy, I echo and I concur. But sometimes there's a gap between the rigorous evidence and a policy recommendation. And in economics in particular, we base a lot of stuff on assumptions, some of which are a bit dubious. So we need to take a pluralistic look at the evidence. And I'm going to point to some instances where I think the report could have gone further. So for example, the report implies that unions and institutions restrict labour market supply, but that's not really substantively backed up. On the employment tax incentive, 2 studies are cited, but not 2 others that are done by Soldier at UCT, which show that this policy's failed. On the social grants in the executive summary, nowhere else in the executive summary does a section open with both a fact and then